The humid air clung to my skin like a warm blanket as I stepped out of my beat-up Honda onto the gravel driveway of Grandpa George's farmhouse. 3 months away at nursing school felt like a lifetime, but the moment I saw that familiar weathered porch with its sagging steps and the old swing where we'd spent countless summer evenings, I knew I was home. The scent of fresh-cut grass mixed with the earthy smell of the nearby creek, creating that distinctive aroma I'd missed more than I realized. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "There's my college boy," Grandpa called from the porch, his voice carrying that familiar warmth that could chase away any worry. At 78, George Carter still stood tall, though I noticed he moved a little slower as he made his way down the steps to greet me. His calloused hands, worn from decades of fixing things for neighbors, gripped my shoulders firmly. "Good to see you, Grandpa," I said, meaning every word. This man had been my anchor through my parents' messy divorce when I was 12, the one who taught me that strength came from helping others, not from having the newest truck or the biggest house. As we walked toward the fence line where the gate hung at an awkward angle, Grandpa wiped his brow with the back of his hand. "Been meaning to fix this for weeks," he said, though I could hear the slight wheeze in his breathing that hadn't been there last Christmas. "Just haven't gotten around to it." We spent the next hour wrestling with rusty hinges and warped wood. What should have been a simple 30-minute job stretched longer as Grandpa had to stop and catch his breath more often than usual. When I suggested we take a break, he waved me off with that stubborn pride I knew so well. "I'm fine, Liam. Just the heat getting to me." But I watched him lean against the fence post, his face pale despite the summer sun, and something cold settled in my stomach. That evening at Mom's house, the contrast couldn't have been sharper. Karen Carter Reynolds had outdone herself with renovations since my last visit. The kitchen now boasted marble countertops that probably cost more than Grandpa's annual property taxes, and every surface gleamed under designer lighting. My stepfather Mark lounged in his leather recliner, scrolling through his phone while Mom fussed over the dinner presentation. "So how's the old man doing?" Mom asked as she arranged asparagus on our plates with the precision of a food stylist. The way she said "old man" made my jaw clench. "He's working too hard," I said carefully. "Maybe slowing down a little. He mentioned something about a doctor's visit next week." Mom's hand paused for just a moment before continuing her arrangement. "Well, he's not getting any younger. Maybe it's time he considered assisted living." "Assisted living?" The words came out sharper than I intended. "Mom, he's not ready for that. He's still taking care of his property, still helping neighbors." "Still being as stubborn as a mule," Mark interjected without looking up from his phone. "Your grandfather's always been too proud to accept help." I wanted to point out that Grandpa never asked for help, only that he'd given it freely to everyone else for decades. Instead, I focused on my plate. The expensive meal suddenly tasted like cardboard. Dr. Melissa Hayes had the kind of steady presence that immediately put patients at ease, but when she asked me to meet her at the clinic privately, her usual calm demeanor carried an undertone of urgency that made my palms sweat. "I'm glad you could come, Liam," she said, gesturing for me to sit in the chair across from her desk. The afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across her collection of medical certificates. My throat tightened. "How bad is it?"
"He needs heart valve replacement surgery. Soon." She pulled out a thick file and opened it carefully. "The echocardiogram shows severe aortic stenosis. Without intervention, his condition will deteriorate rapidly. We're talking months, not years." The words hit me like a physical blow. I thought of Grandpa this morning, insisting he could handle the fence repair alone, his quiet pride masking what must have been significant discomfort. "But surgery can fix it, right? He'll be okay." Dr. Hayes nodded. The procedure has good success rates for someone his age, especially given his overall health. That's why I scheduled it for next month. She paused, and something in her expression made my blood run cold. But there's been a complication. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. Official letterhead, formal language, but my mother's signature at the bottom was unmistakable. The surgery was canceled yesterday. By your mother. I stared at the document, reading the same words over and over, hoping they'd change meaning. There has to be some mistake. I'm afraid not. Mrs. Reynolds called personally to cancel. She cited financial concerns. Dr. Hayes leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Liam, your grandfather doesn't know yet. I was hoping to understand the family's position before having that conversation with him. My hands shook as I set the paper down. What happens if he doesn't have the surgery? His heart will continue to weaken. Eventually, it will fail. She didn't sugarcoat it, and I appreciated that even as the reality crushed down on me. I've seen patients in his condition decline rapidly once they reach this stage. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I need to talk to my mother. Liam, Dr. Hayes called as I reached the door. Family dynamics can be complicated, but your grandfather is a good man who deserves a chance. I found Mom in her pristine kitchen, the same marble countertops gleaming under the late afternoon sun. She was arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase, each stem positioned with the same meticulous care she applied to everything in her curated life. We need to talk about Grandpa's surgery, I said without preamble. Her hands stilled for a moment before continuing their work. I wondered when you'd hear about that. You canceled it. It wasn't a question. I made a practical decision. She turned to face me, her expression composed. The surgery costs over $60,000 after insurance. That would wipe out a significant portion of our savings. Our savings? Since when is Grandpa's medical care a family expense? Mark wandered into the kitchen, probably drawn by the tension in our voices. He opened the refrigerator and grabbed a beer, listening but pretending not to. Look, Liam, we understand you're close to George, but at his age, there's no guarantee he'd even survive the recovery. Maybe it's better to let nature take its course. The casual way he dismissed Grandpa's life made my vision blur with anger. Nature take its course? He's not a dying animal, Mark. He's a human being who raised your wife, who helped pay for my college tuition when you two were struggling. Mum's face flushed. He chose to do that. No one asked him to. And you choose not to help him now. No one's asking you to either, apparently. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. Don't you dare make me the villain here, Liam. I'm being responsible. Someone in this family has to think with their head instead of their heart. As I walked out, I caught sight of their new living room furniture, the price tags probably removed just days ago. $60,000 to save a man's life versus $60,000 for marble and leather. The choice seemed clear to everyone except the two people who mattered most. Ella's bedroom felt like a sanctuary compared to the sterile perfection of the rest of the house. Band posters covered every inch of wall space, and her desk overflowed with textbooks and art supplies. At 17, my sister had inherited Grandpa's quiet intensity, but where his was tempered by decades of experience, hers burned with teenage righteousness. "I heard you fighting with Mom," she said without looking up from her sketchpad. "About Grandpa's surgery." I slumped into her desk chair, suddenly exhausted. "Did you know she canceled it?" I suspected. Ella's pencil moved in quick, angry strokes across the paper. "I overheard her talking to Mark last week. She said the surgery money would be better invested in paying off their mortgage early." The words hit me like a slap. Not that they couldn't afford it, but that paying off their house 2 years early was more important than Grandpa's life. "There's more." Ella set down her pencil and pulled a manila folder from beneath a stack of books. "I've been keeping track. Inside were printouts of bank statements, home improvement receipts, and credit card bills. The numbers told a clear story. Kitchen renovation, $47,000. New furniture, $23,000. Landscaping, $18,000. All within the past 6 months. Where did you get these? Mom leaves everything on her desk in the home office. She thinks I'm too young to understand financial documents. Ella's smile was grim. I understand enough to know they spent close to $90,000 on this house while claiming they can't afford $60,000 for Grandpa's surgery. I flipped through the papers. My anger crystallized into something colder and more focused. This wasn't about money. It was about priorities, about what Mom valued and what she was willing to sacrifice. "What are you going to do?" Ella asked quietly. "I don't know yet, but I'm not letting him die because she wants granite countertops." My sister nodded, her expression fierce. "Whatever you need, I'll help. Grandpa deserves better than this." That evening, I sat with Grandpa on his porch as the sun set behind the tree line. The cicadas were singing their summer song, and the air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle from the vine that had overgrown his mailbox. In the distance, fireflies began their nightly dance above the creek. "Grandpa," I began carefully, "I talked to Dr. Hayes today." His weathered hands gripped the arms of his rocking chair a little tighter. "I figured she might reach out to family. She told me about the surgery and that Mom canceled it." For a long moment, the only sounds were the creaking of his chair and the evening symphony of insects. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "I'm not going to beg for it, Liam." "You shouldn't have to beg. It's your life we're talking about." "It's also not my money." He stopped rocking and looked at me directly. "I won't take what isn't freely given, and I won't tear this family apart over an old man's heart." The resignation in his voice broke something inside me. This was the man who had secretly sold his beloved truck to help pay my college tuition, who had spent his retirement fixing neighbors' roofs and never accepting payment, who had raised me with stories of courage and standing up for what was right.
What if I told you it doesn't have to tear anyone apart? How's that? What if the money came from somewhere else? Grandpa studied my face in the fading light. "Liam, you're 21 years old with college loans and a future to think about. Don't even consider doing something foolish." But as we sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky, I was already considering exactly that. Sometimes doing the right thing required a little foolishness. Grandpa had taught me that, even if he'd forgotten it himself. The porch swing creaked gently as I pushed it with my foot, the sound mixing with Grandpa's steady breathing. In the morning, I'd start making calls. By next week, I'd have a plan. By the end of the month, George Carter would have his surgery, whether his daughter approved or not. Some battles were worth fighting, even if it meant going to war with your own family. The next morning, I was splitting firewood behind Grandpa's barn when Mr. Dalton's old pickup truck rumbled up the dirt drive. Harold Dalton had been Grandpa's neighbor for over 40 years, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from the same oak trees that lined his property. He climbed out slowly, carrying a basket of fresh peaches that filled the air with their sweet summer scent. "Figured George might enjoy these," he said, setting the basket on the porch steps. "Heard tell he's been under the weather." I leaned the axe against the woodpile, wiping sweat from my forehead. In a town this small, news traveled faster than wildfire, especially news about someone as respected as Grandpa. "He's doing okay," I said carefully, "just taking things a day at a time." Mr. Dalton's sharp blue eyes studied me for a moment. "And how are you taking things, son?" Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. This wasn't casual small talk. I'm managing. Your grandfather ever tell you about the winter of '98? I shook my head, settling onto the porch steps beside the peach basket. Grandpa eased himself down with a grunt, his joints protesting the movement. Worst ice storm we seen in decades. Knocked out tower for 2 weeks, trees down everywhere. My barn roof caved in, crushed half my equipment. He picked up a peach, turning it over in his weathered hands. I was ready to pack it in, sell the farm, move to town like my wife wanted. The morning air was still cool, carrying the scent of dew-soaked grass and the distant promise of another scorching day. George showed up the morning after the storm with his chainsaw and a thermos of coffee. Didn't say much, just started cutting up the tree that had fallen across my barn. Worked for 3 days straight. Wouldn't take a dime. Mr. Dalton's voice grew quiet. Never asked for anything in return. Never mentioned it again. I thought of all the stories like that I'd heard over the years. Grandpa rebuilding Mrs. Peterson's front steps after her husband died, driving the Williams family to the hospital when their youngest broke his arm and their car wouldn't start, fixing Tommy Rodriguez's motorcycle in time for prom. He's helped half this town at one point or another. Most folks remember, some don't, but that's not why he did it. Why did he do it? The old man's eyes crinkled at the corners. Because that's the kind of man he chose to be. Every day he got up and chose to be someone who helped instead of someone who looked the other way. Question is, what kind of man are you choosing to be? The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I thought about Mom's marble countertops, about her careful calculations that put home equity above human life. I thought about Mark's casual dismissal of Grandpa's worth. Most of all, I thought about Grandpa sitting in his rocking chair last night, too proud to fight for his own survival.
I want to be the kind of man who fights for the people who matter, I said finally. Mr. Dalton nodded slowly. Thought you might say that. Your grandfather raised you right, even if your mama lost her way somewhere along the line. He stood up, brushing peach fuzz from his hands. You need help with anything? You let me know. George has a lot of friends in this town who haven't forgotten what he's done for him. As his truck disappeared down the dusty road, I stared at the basket of peaches and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about family obligation anymore. It was about community, about the web of quiet kindnesses that held places like this together. Grandpa had spent decades weaving that web. Now it was time for it to catch him when he fell. Back at my dorm room 3 days later, I spread my financial documents across my narrow desk like a general planning a campaign. My savings account showed $8,347, money I'd earned from summer jobs and carefully hoarded for emergencies. My car, a 2018 Honda Civic with 89,000 miles, was worth maybe $12,000 if I was lucky. My textbooks, laptop, and everything else I could liquidate might bring another $1,000. It wasn't nearly enough. I picked up my phone and dialed the number Mr. Dalton had slipped me before I left town. A gruff voice answered on the third ring. Pedersen Auto Repair. This is Liam Carter, George Carter's grandson. Mr. Dalton said you might be willing to help with something. There was a pause, then the voice softened. George's boy. Heard you might be calling. What do you need? Over the next hour, I made 7 similar calls. To the owner of Thompson's Hardware, whose store Grandpa had helped rebuild after a fire. To Maria Santos, whose family had lived in Grandpa's guest house rent-free for 6 months after they lost their apartment. To the pastor of Second Baptist, where Grandpa had quietly fixed the church van every time it broke down. Each conversation was different, but the response was always the same. How much do you need? When do you need it? What can we do to help? By evening,
I had commitments for $31,000. Not loans, gifts, from people who remembered what George Carter had done for them when they needed help most. I called Dr. Hayes and tentatively rescheduled the surgery for 2 weeks out. Then I called Ella. "I need you to open a savings account," I told her, "one Mom doesn't know about." "Already done," she said. "Opened it yesterday with money from my graduation gifts. Figure you'd need somewhere to funnel the funds." My sister was 17 years old and already thinking 3 steps ahead. Grandpa would be proud. "There's one more thing," I said. "I need you to make sure Grandpa gets to the hospital on the morning of the surgery. Can you handle that?" "Consider it done. But Liam?" Her voice carried a note of concern. "What happens when Mom finds out?" I stared out my dorm window at the campus quad, watching students my age worry about finals and summer internships and whether their crushes would text them back. Simple problems with simple solutions. I guess we'll find out. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I was helping Grandpa replace a broken window pane when Mom's car screeched into the driveway, gravel flying. She emerged with a bank statement clutched in her hand like a weapon, her face flush with fury. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she shouted, storming toward us. Grandpa looked up from the window frame, confusion creasing his weathered features. "Karen, what's wrong?" "Your grandson," she spat, waving the paper, "has been stealing money, moving funds around, making unauthorized withdrawals from family accounts." "I haven't stolen anything, Mom."
Then explain this, she thrust the statement at me. Explain why Ella suddenly has a savings account with $15,000 in it. Explain the mysterious deposits from half the town. Grandpa's eyes moved between us, understanding dawning slowly. "Liam, what is she talking about?" Before I could answer, Mark's Mercedes pulled up behind Mom's car. He climbed out wearing his weekend golf attire, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Let's all calm down," he said, though his voice carried an edge of annoyance. "This is getting out of hand." "Out of hand?" Mom's voice cracked with emotion. "My son is undermining my authority, going behind my back, convincing my own daughter to deceive me. How is that not out of hand?" "Because you condemned your father to death!" The words erupted from me with volcanic force, 3 weeks of suppressed rage finally breaking free. "You canceled his surgery so you could pay off your mortgage 2 years early and buy more furniture to impress your country club friends." Grandpa stood slowly, his face pale. "Liam, what surgery?" Mom's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. In her fury, she'd revealed the secret she'd been keeping from him. "The heart valve replacement Dr. Hayes scheduled, the one that could save your life. The one Mom canceled because she didn't want to spend the money." The silence that followed was deafening. Grandpa looked at his daughter with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, but something deeper and more painful. Disappointment that cut to the bone. "Is that true, Karen?" Mom's face crumpled. "Daddy, I was trying to be practical." "At your age, the risks—" "Don't." His voice was quiet but carried the authority of a man who'd spent decades commanding respect. "Don't make this about my age or medical risks. This is about what you value more, my life or your lifestyle." Mark stepped forward, his hands raised in a peacemaking gesture. "George, you have to understand there are long-standing family financial obligations to consider. Karen's been carrying grudges about—" "Grudges? What grudges?" Mom shot Mark a warning look, but it was too late. The dam had burst. "You wouldn't sell the farm to help us with our first house down payment. You said we needed to make our own way. But now when we need help, suddenly we're supposed to drop everything?" The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. This wasn't about money at all. This was about revenge, a decades-old resentment festering until it poisoned everything it touched. "I see. This is about settling old scores." "It's about fairness," Mom said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's about choosing what kind of daughter you want to be," I interrupted. just like I'm choosing what kind of grandson I want to be. I pulled the hospital admission papers from my back pocket. Grandpa, your surgery is scheduled for Friday morning. The money's already been raised. People who remember what you've done for them. People who understand what community means. Mom stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. You can't do this without my consent. I'm your next of kin. I have medical power of attorney. Actually, you don't, Grandpa said, his voice gaining strength. I updated my advance directives last month after my doctor's visit. Liam is now my healthcare proxy. The revelation hit Mom like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her face cycling through shock, betrayal, and finally, cold fury. Fine, she said, her voice venomous. But don't expect me to be there when you wake up, and don't expect me to forgive this betrayal. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. You've chosen your side, Liam. Live with the consequences.
As her car disappeared down the dirt road, leaving a cloud of dust and broken relationships in its wake, Grandpa placed a weathered hand on my shoulder. "You didn't have to do this, son." "Yes, I did," I said. "Someone had to fight for you since you won't fight for yourself." Friday morning arrived gray and humid, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon like an omen. Ella and I flanked Grandpa as we walked through the automatic doors of Regional Medical Center, the sterile smell of disinfectant replacing the earthy scents of the farm. Dr. Hayes met us in the pre-op area, her calm professionalism a steadying presence in the controlled chaos of the surgical ward. She reviewed the procedure one final time while nurses prepared IV lines and checked vital signs. "I have to ask one more time, Mr. Carter," she said gently. "Are you sure about this? Once we begin, there's no going back." Grandpa looked at me, then at Ella, who had driven us here in her beat-up Toyota despite being terrified of highway driving. His granddaughter, barely 17, had navigated rush-hour traffic and hospital parking garages because she believed this was right. "Doctor," he said, his voice clear and strong, "I've spent my whole life believing that when good people stand up for you, you don't let them down. These kids risked everything to give me this chance. I'd be a fool not to take it." As they wheeled him toward the operating room, he caught my hand. "Thank you, Liam. Whatever happens in there, you did the right thing." The waiting room became our temporary home for the next 6 hours. Ella dozed fitfully in an uncomfortable chair while I paced the length of the room, watching the clock crawl forward. Mr. Dalton arrived around noon with coffee and sandwiches, followed by Mrs. Peterson and her daughter. By mid-afternoon, a small crowd of Grandpa's friends had gathered, turning the sterile waiting area into an impromptu community center. "Never seen anything like it," whispered one of the nurses to another as she passed through. "Usually these surgeries are just immediate family. Sometimes family is bigger than blood relations," I heard Mrs. Peterson tell her daughter. At 4:17 p.m., Dr. Hayes appeared in her surgical scrubs, her face tired but smiling. "The surgery went perfectly. His heart is strong and the new valve is functioning beautifully." The collective sigh of relief from our makeshift family was audible. Ella burst into tears she'd been holding back all day. Mr. Dalton clapped me on the back so hard I nearly stumbled. "He'll be in recovery for several hours, but you can see him briefly once he's stable." When they finally let us into his room, Grandpa looked smaller somehow, dwarfed by the machines and monitors that surrounded his bed. But his eyes were alert, and when he saw us, his face lit up with that familiar warm smile. "How do you feel?" Ella asked, taking his hand carefully. "Like I could split another cord of firewood, though I suppose the doctors might have something to say about that." A commotion in the hallway caught our attention. Raised voices, someone arguing with the nursing staff. My stomach clenched as I recognized one of those voices. Mom appeared in the doorway, Mark trailing behind her looking deeply uncomfortable. Her face was a mask of conflicted emotions, relief, anger, shame,
and something that might have been regret. "Daddy," she said quietly, stepping just inside the room. "I heard the surgery went well." The tension in the hospital room was thick as a scalpel. Mom stood awkwardly at the foot of Grandpa's bed, her designer purse clutched like a shield, while Mark lingered near the door, as if ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Grandpa studied his daughter for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The monitors continued their steady beeping, the only sound in a room full of unspoken words. "Karen," he said finally, his voice gentle despite everything that had passed between them. "I'm glad you came." She swallowed hard, her composure cracking. "I was scared," she admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "Not about the money. That was never really about the money. I was scared of watching you suffer through recovery. Scared of having to make medical decisions. Scared of losing you slowly instead of—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "Instead of losing me quickly," Grandpa completed. "I understand that fear, sweetheart. I felt the same way when your mother was sick." Tears spilled down Mom's cheeks, years of carefully maintained control finally crumbling. "But that's not an excuse for what I did. I let my fear turn into resentment, and I took that out on you. I convinced myself you were being stubborn and unreasonable when really I was being selfish." Mark shifted uncomfortably by the door. "Karen, maybe we should let him rest." "No," Grandpa said firmly, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. "She needs to say this, and I need to hear it." Mom moved closer to the bed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was angry about the house down payment, about all the times you said we needed to be self-reliant. But you were right. We did need to learn to stand on our own. And when you needed help, I should have been there without question." She looked at me then, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Liam, what you did, it took courage I forgot I had. You reminded me what family is supposed to mean." "Mom," I started, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I don't even expect your grandfather to forgive me. But I want you both to know that from now on, things will be different. I want to be the kind of person who chooses love over fear." Grandpa reached toward her with his free hand, the one not connected to IV lines. "Karen, you're my daughter. There's nothing to forgive. You made a mistake born from fear and old hurt. We all carry scars from the past." She took his hand, crying openly now. "I almost lost you because I was too proud and scared to do the right thing. But you didn't lose me," Grandpa said softly. "And you know why? Because your son has more backbone than any of us realized. He fought for what was right even when it meant going against family. That's the kind of man you and his father raised despite your mistakes." I felt Ella's hand slip into mine, her teenage wisdom somehow understanding that this moment wasn't about taking sides anymore. It was about healing. "The surgery changes everything," Dr. Hayes had told us. She meant it medically, but sitting in that hospital room watching my mother finally confront her own failings, while my grandfather offered grace she didn't deserve, I realized she was right in ways she never intended. Mark cleared his throat from the doorway. "George, for what it's worth, I'm sorry too. I should have supported what was right instead of what was easy." Grandpa nodded acknowledgement, but didn't respond. Some forgiveness would take longer than others. As visiting hours wound down, Mom kissed Grandpa's forehead and squeezed my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "More proud than I've ever been." 3 weeks later, I sat on Grandpa's porch swing as the summer evening settled around us like a familiar embrace. His recovery had been remarkable. Dr. Hayes called him her poster child for successful cardiac surgery. The cicadas were singing their eternal song, and fireflies danced over the creek just like they had on countless summer nights before.
You know, Grandpa said, slowly rocking in his chair, I never told you about the truck. What truck? The '78 Ford I sold 5 years ago. You always wondered where it went. I had wondered. That truck had been his pride and joy for decades.
I sold it to help pay your college tuition. Your mother didn't know, thought the money came from my savings. He chuckled softly. Funny how things come full circle. You sacrificed your future to save my life, and I sacrificed my truck to help build your future. The weight of that revelation settled over me. All those years, he'd been making quiet sacrifices while teaching me the importance of standing up for others. Grandpa, don't feel guilty about it, son. That truck was just metal and memories. But watching you become the kind of man who fights for what's right, that's worth more than any possession I ever owned. A car pulled into the driveway, and we both looked up to see Mom's sedan approaching. She'd been coming by twice a week since the surgery, bringing groceries and staying for dinner. It wasn't the same relationship they had before. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. But it was a start. Do you think she'll really change? I asked. Grandpa was quiet for a moment, watching his daughter park and gather grocery bags from her trunk. People can surprise you, Liam. Sometimes it takes nearly losing everything to remember what matters most. As Mom walked up the porch steps, I realized that the summer had changed all of us. I'd learned that sometimes love requires courage, that doing the right thing often comes at a personal cost, and that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up when everything falls apart. Evening, boys, Mom said, settling into the third rocking chair with a tired smile. How was your day? Pretty good, Grandpa replied, glancing at me with eyes that sparkled with life and possibility. Pretty damn good. The three of us sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, the sound of cicadas mixing with the gentle creaking of the porch swing. Some battles scar you, others heal you, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, they do both. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.